A man's arrogance is a dangerous thing. For Arthur Vance, it was a blinding narcotic. He stood on the balcony of the 20,000 a night imperial suite at Villa Kestrel, his arm wrapped around a woman who was not his wife. He'd brought his mistress to the most exclusive resort on Lake Como to celebrate the end of his marriage, assuming his quiet, timid wife was at home, weeping. He was about to humiliate her, to flaunt his new life in her face. But Arthur made one catastrophic mistake. He assumed he was the predator when he was merely the fool walking into the trap. The Riva boat cut through the azure water of Lake Como, its mahogany deck gleaming like polished obsidian. Arthur Vance checked his watch, a Patek Philippe Nautilus, rose gold. It was a $300,000 statement that screamed, "I have arrived." Beside him, Sienna, squeezed into a canary yellow dress, angled her phone to capture her profile against the dramatic backdrop of the Alps. "Is it exclusive, baby?" she asked, her voice a breathy purr. "I don't want to see any families." "The Villa Kestrel, darling," Arthur replied, his voice booming with the self-satisfaction of a man who had just conquered the world. "It's not a hotel, it's a private estate. They only have 12 suites. The waiting list is 3 years long, unless you're me." He had, of course, leveraged a recent, spectacular quarter at his hedge fund, Vance Capital, to bully the concierge at his private bank into securing the reservation. This trip was a celebration, a victory lap. 2 days ago, he had instructed his lawyers to serve divorce papers to his wife, Amelia. Amelia. The name tasted like ash in his mouth. Dull, beige, predictable Amelia. She was the woman he'd married 15 years ago, a strategic merger of his new money ambition with her quiet, respectable family name. She was the ballast he'd needed then, but now she was just dead weight. She spent her days managing her family office, a quaint little inheritance he never bothered to look into, and engaging in quiet philanthropy. She was a ghost in his minimalist mansion, a woman who wore cashmere in neutral tones and never, ever raised her voice. Sienna was the opposite. She was loud, demanding, and spectacularly beautiful. She was a living, breathing trophy, a testament to his success. The boat slowed, approaching a stone dock shrouded in ancient wisteria. A man in an impeccably tailored linen suit was waiting. This was Alessandro Bianchi, the general manager. "Mr. Vance, welcome to Villa Kestrel," Bianchi said, his smile polite but lacking warmth. "We have the imperial suite," Arthur announced, not as a question, but as a declaration. "Of course, sir. If you would follow me." The grounds were magnificent, a tiered paradise of cypress trees and blooming azaleas. Arthur felt a surge of power. This was his world now. As they were led into the main villa, a converted 17th century palace, Arthur paused. "My bags," he snapped, gesturing back toward the dock. "They are already in your suite, sir," Bianchi replied smoothly. The imperial suite was larger than his first apartment. It was a sprawling expanse of marble, frescoes, and modern Italian furniture, with a private terrace that seemed to float over the lake. "This will do," Sienna said, flopping onto a chaise lounge and immediately starting a video for her followers. Arthur, meanwhile, cornered Bianchi. "I'll need a dinner reservation for tonight. 8 o'clock. The best table at your restaurant, Alba d'Oro. And I'll require a specific wine. A double magnum of the 97 Screaming Eagle." Bianchi's eyebrow twitched, the barest flicker of surprise. "Sir, our restaurant focuses on indigenous Italian varietals. I am almost certain we do not have that particular Napa Cabernet." "Then find it," Arthur said, dismissing him with a wave. "Have it flown in from Milan. I don't care about the cost. I am celebrating a significant personal victory." "As you wish, sir," Bianchi said, his voice clipped. "Will Signora Vance be joining you for this trip?" Arthur laughed, a short, barking sound. "You mean my wife? God, no. She's not exactly the Villa Kestrel type. She's at home, probably, cataloguing stamps or whatever it is she does. We're getting a divorce. This," he said, gesturing to Sienna, "is the future." Bianchi's expression remained unreadable. He simply nodded. "I see. Enjoy your stay, Mr. Vance." As the manager left, Arthur uncorked the complimentary bottle of champagne. He felt invincible. He had his youth, or a semblance of it, a stunning mistress, and a rapidly expanding fortune. He had finally cut the cord from his boring, passionless marriage. He raised his glass to Sienna. "To new beginnings," he toasted. "To us," she giggled, clinking her glass against his. From the lake below, the distant thrum of another boat engine approached, but Arthur, lost in his own reflection in the window, paid it no mind. The first 24 hours were a blur of decadent indulgence, precisely as Arthur had planned. He and Sienna were deliberately, extravagantly loud. They monopolized the main infinity pool, taking endless photos and ordering magnums of rosé before noon. Arthur took work calls by the pool, shouting aggressive instructions to his traders in New York about shorting a new tech stock. "We're going to bleed them dry, Robert," he yelled into his phone, enjoying the winces from an elderly couple reading nearby. Sienna, meanwhile, treated the staff with a casual disdain that mirrored Arthur's. She sent back a plate of prosciutto e melone because the melon was too orange. She complained that the thread count on the pool towels was acceptable, but not amazing. Arthur loved it. He loved her entitlement. It reflected his own. That evening, they prepared for their dinner at Ristorante Alba d'Oro. Arthur was fastening his Patek when his lawyer, Stephen, called from New York. "Arthur, just confirming. The papers were served to Amelia's residence this morning. The process server noted she accepted them personally." "And? Did she cry? Fall apart?" Arthur asked, straightening his silk tie. The server just said she was polite. She signed for them and closed the door. Arthur scoffed. "Polite, of course. She's probably already called her mother and retreated to the family home in Connecticut." "Pathetic. Good. The quicker she accepts this, the quicker I can finalize the settlement. Give her the house. I don't care. I'll buy 3 more. "About the settlement, Arthur." Stephen paused. "Her lawyers haven't responded yet. But the prenup is ironclad. She gets the house and the stipulated alimony. Your main assets, the fund, are completely protected." "Exactly," Arthur said. "She was a nice distraction, but she can't compete in the big leagues. Now, if you'll excuse me, Stephen, I have a $10,000 bottle of wine waiting for me." He hung up and turned to Sienna, who was applying a final layer of lip gloss. "It's done," he said. "The anchor is officially cut." They descended the grand staircase to the restaurant. The maitre d' led them to the best table, set on a small private balcony overlooking the twinkling lights of Bellagio across the lake. It was obscenely romantic. "See?" Arthur whispered to Sienna. "I own this place." The dinner began well. The food was undeniably brilliant, but Arthur was waiting for his wine. Finally, Mr. Bianchi approached their table, his hands empty. "Mr. Vance, my sincere apologies." "You found it, I trust?" Arthur said, annoyed at the interruption. "Sir, as I explained, we do not carry that bottle. I did, as requested, contact our suppliers in Milan and even Zurich. It is not possible to procure a double magnum of that vintage on such short notice." Arthur felt a flush of anger. "Not possible? Do you understand who I am? Not possible isn't an acceptable answer. We do, however," Bianchi continued, his voice dangerously calm. have one of the finest cellars in Lombardy. I would be happy to recommend a Barolo or a Super Tuscan that would far exceed—" "I don't want a Barolo," Arthur snapped, his voice rising. Several diners turned to look. "I wanted what I asked for. This is supposed to be a 5-star establishment," Sienna chimed in. "He told you like hours ago. Are you incompetent?" Bianchi's eyes hardened, but his voice remained level. "I apologize that we could not meet your expectations, Signorina. I will leave you to your meal." He turned and walked away. "The nerve!" Arthur hissed. "I'll have his job for this. I'll buy this entire hotel and fire him myself." "You should, baby," Sienna agreed, already forgetting the wine and taking a selfie. But the interaction left a bitter taste in Arthur's mouth. It was the first time since his arrival that his power had been questioned. It was a tiny crack in the facade of his perfect weekend, and it infuriated him. He felt a prickle of unease, a sense that the deference he'd been shown earlier was not awe, but something else. A strained tolerance. He pushed the feeling down, ordering the most expensive other wine on the list and drinking it too quickly. He would not let some jumped-up hotel manager ruin his triumph. The next day, Arthur woke with a dull headache from the wine. He was determined to erase the previous night's slight. He would spend the day on the lake, projecting an image of such effortless wealth that the entire staff would be forced to grovel. He and Sienna emerged onto the sun-drenched breakfast terrace, dressed in matching white linen. Arthur was loudly detailing his plan to rent the hotel's vintage Riva speedboat for the day when he suddenly froze. His coffee cup stopped halfway to his lips. Across the terrace, seated at a quiet corner table shaded by a massive olive tree, was Amelia. It was impossible. He blinked, certain the high-proof wine and the bright sun were creating a mirage. But it was her. She was not crying. She was not dressed in black. She was wearing a simple, elegant, cream-colored silk shell top and white trousers. Loro Piana, he registered absently. Her brown hair was pulled back in a simple chignon. She was reading a book and sipping an espresso. She looked peaceful. Sienna, oblivious, was still talking. "And I want them to pack a huge basket, with caviar, and those little sandwiches and—" "Shut up!" Arthur hissed. "What?" Sienna looked offended. Arthur couldn't take his eyes off his wife. His wife, here in the same hotel. How dare she? His mind raced, cycling through emotions. First, shock, then a burning, white-hot rage. She was stalking him. She had received the divorce papers and, in a pathetic, desperate move, had followed him here to— What? Confront him? Make a scene? Beg him to come back? A slow, cruel smile spread across his face. The initial shock subsided, replaced by a profound sense of satisfaction. This was even better than he'd imagined. He thought she would crumble in private, in their empty mansion. But she had delivered herself to him. She had brought her humiliation to the most beautiful place on earth, right to his doorstep. "Baby, what is it?" Sienna asked, finally noticing his fixed stare. She followed his gaze. "Oh my God, is that her?" "The soon-to-be ex-Mrs. Vance?" Arthur sneered, his good mood restored. "What is she doing here?" Sienna whispered, horrified. "This is our trip. It's so tacky. She looks so plain." "She's desperate, darling. This is the last pathetic act of a dying animal," Arthur said, savoring the moment. "She thinks she can guilt me. She thinks she can ruin our celebration." He watched Amelia for a long moment. The most unsettling part was her calm. She didn't look like a woman on the verge of a breakdown. She looked serene. She turned a page in her book. She ordered a second espresso from a waiter, who addressed her with a familiarity that annoyed Arthur. "Well, I'm not having it," Sienna declared, standing up. "I'm going to go over there and tell her to leave." No. Arthur pulled her back down, his mind formulating a much more delicious plan. Don't interrupt her. Let her have her breakfast. We'll be on the boat all day. The real fun, the real confrontation, should be public. Let's wait until tonight, at the bar, right before dinner. We'll let everyone see her for what she is." "What is she?" Sienna asked, confused. "A ghost," Arthur said, his eyes glinting. "And it's time to exorcise her." But as he tried to enjoy his day, the image of her calm, composed face plagued him. He'd expected tears, hysterics, shouted accusations. He'd expected a fight. Her quiet presence was a dissonant note in his perfectly composed symphony of triumph. He found himself checking the terrace from the boat, wondering if she was still there. He became agitated, snapping at Sienna when she asked him to take a photo for the 10th time. "Just enjoy the view, will you?" he barked. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Her being there wasn't just desperate. It was illogical. Amelia hated attention. She hated confrontation. Why would she fly across the world to a place she knew he would be, only to sit quietly and read a book? He dismissed it as the bizarre, irrational behavior of a woman scorned. He was in control. He was the one with the power. And that evening, he was going to prove it. The air at sunset was thick with the scent of jasmine. The hotel's main terrace bar was filling up with the other guests, a German industrialist, a French actress, a Silicon Valley billionaire. It was a crowd of quiet, immense power. This was the stage Arthur had chosen. He and Sienna took a central sofa, ordering the most expensive champagne. He saw Amelia enter the terrace. She was alone. She had changed into a simple, navy blue silk dress. No jewelry, save for her plain gold wedding band, which she twisted thoughtfully, and a pair of simple pearl earrings. She took a small table by the balustrade, overlooking the lake. She ordered a glass of water with lemon. "She's not even drinking," Sienna whispered, disgusted. "It's like she's trying to be boring." "It's show time," Arthur said, standing up. He smoothed his custom-made blazer, took Sienna's hand, and began to walk toward his wife. He felt the eyes of the other guests follow him. They recognized him from the pool. They recognized her from breakfast. This was going to be delicious. He stopped directly in front of her table. She looked up, her expression mild, as if noticing a waiter, not the husband who had just filed for divorce. "Amelia," Arthur began, his voice dripping with false pity. "What a fascinating surprise." "Hello, Arthur," she said, her voice even. "Sienna." Sienna, feeling her cue, stepped forward. "I just don't understand what you're doing here, Amelia. It's really pathetic. Can't you take a hint? He's with me. This is our vacation." Arthur held up a hand, silencing Sienna with a gesture. Now, darling. Let's be gentle. She's clearly going through a difficult time." He looked back at Amelia, his smile becoming a sneer. "Really, Amelia? This is a new low, even for you. Following me here? Did you really think you could fly to Lake Como and I'd just... what? Forget everything and take you back?" Amelia took a slow sip of her water. "I'm not here for you, Arthur." "Oh, please." Arthur laughed, a harsh sound that made the German industrialist look over with annoyance. "Who else would you be here for? Did you come to scrub the floors? I didn't realize your little family fund was doing so poorly that you needed a part-time job." "You need to leave," Sienna insisted. "You're embarrassing yourself. You're embarrassing him." "She's right," Arthur said, leaning in, his voice dropping to a confidential, cruel whisper. "It's over. I've moved on. I've upgraded. You need to accept it. Go home. Go back to your garden, or your charities, or whatever it is you do. You don't belong here. This world, it's not for you. It's for people who take what they want. You're just..." The person who gets left behind. He stood back, arms crossed, waiting for the tears, waiting for the breakdown. Amelia simply looked at him. She held his gaze for a full 10 seconds, her eyes clear and steady. There was no pain in them. There was no anger. He couldn't place it. It looked almost like pity. "Are you finished?" she asked. The question caught him off guard. "Am I—" "What?" "Your speech. It was very theatrical. Are you finished?" Before Arthur could reply, Mr. Bianchi, the general manager, appeared at his elbow. His face was a mask of cold professionalism. "Mr. Vance," Bianchi said, his voice quiet but carrying the unmistakable weight of authority. "Ah, Bianchi," Arthur said, turning triumphant. "Perfect timing. It seems we have a trespasser. This woman is not a guest. She is my estranged wife, and she is harassing me. Please have her removed from the property. Quietly, if possible. I'm feeling generous." Sienna smirked, pulling out her phone, no doubt to film the walk of shame. Bianchi did not look at Amelia. His eyes were locked on Arthur. "Mr. Vance, I am the one who must ask you to be quiet. You are causing a disturbance to our other guests." Arthur's smile vanished. "Excuse me. I am the guest. She is the trespasser. Remove her. Now." "I'm afraid you are mistaken, sir," Bianchi said. "Signora Vance is our guest. You are the one who is no longer welcome." The terrace went silent. The only sound was the gentle la-la-la-lap of the lake water against the stone walls below. Arthur felt a cold dread, a sudden sickening drop in his stomach, like a faulty elevator. What did you just say?" "He said you're not welcome, Arthur," Amelia said, finally setting her water glass down. She stood up. She was shorter than him, but suddenly she seemed to command the entire terrace. "This is ridiculous," Arthur sputtered, looking around for support. The other guests were pointedly looking away, pretending to be fascinated by their olives. "I have the Imperial Suite. I'm paying $20,000 a night. You can't. Bianchi, are you insane? Do you know who I am?" "I'm afraid I do, Mr. Vance," Bianchi said, "and I am acting on direct orders from my employer." "Then get your employer," Arthur roared. "He's standing right in front of him," Amelia said. The world seemed to tilt. Arthur stared at her. He looked at Bianchi. He looked back at her. The dots connected, but the picture they made was impossible. You're not?" "What?" Amelia asked. "A guest? You're right, I'm not. I haven't been a guest here for 6 weeks. She turned to the manager. "Alessandro, how are the new kitchen renovations at Albadoro coming along? I saw the invoices for the new Molteni stoves." "They are performing beautifully, Signora Vance," Bianchi replied, his voice now filled with the warmth that had been absent before. "The chefs are ecstatic. Your choice was, as always, perfect." "Signora Vance?" Arthur whispered. The name echoed in his ears. Bianchi had used it before, at the dock, but he'd assumed. "I bought it, Arthur," Amelia said, her voice flat as if discussing the weather. "The Villa Kestrel, and the 2 smaller properties in Tuscany, and the vineyard in Piedmont. My quaint little family office, as you called it, decided to expand its hospitality portfolio. This," she gestured to the stunning villa around them, "is one of its smaller, more recent acquisitions." Arthur's mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. You're lying," he finally managed to say. "This is a joke, a sick, twisted joke." "Am I?" Amelia reached into her Bottega Veneta clutch and pulled out a single key card. It was a heavy, black metal card. "This is the master override. It opens every door in this hotel, including, I believe, the Imperial Suite. She turned to Bianchi. Alessandro, Mr. Vance, and his guest will be checking out immediately. Wait! Sienna shrieked, finally finding her voice. Her face was pale with shock. You can't do this. We have a reservation. We've paid. On the contrary, Amelia said, turning her cool gaze on Sienna. Your reservation, which was tied to Mr. Vance's corporate account, was cancelled this morning. As for payment, she looked at Arthur. The credit card you have on file, the Amex Centurion card from the corporate account, it was declined about, 2 hours ago. A rather precipitous drop in your available credit, it seems. This was the part Arthur couldn't understand. Declined? That's impossible. My fund is worth 9 figures. I have a limitless credit line. Had, Arthur, Amelia corrected him. You had a limitless credit line. You see, that's the other thing I've been busy with. What? What other thing? Arthur asked, but he was afraid of the answer. The air had become thin. He couldn't seem to draw a full breath. While you were celebrating, I was with my legal team, Amelia explained, her tone conversational. You were always so careless with the paperwork, Arthur. You found it so boring. You just signed whatever Stephen put in front of you. The prenup, Arthur said, grasping at straws. It's ironclad. My fund is protected. Your fund, yes. Vance Capital is all yours, Amelia agreed. The problem, Arthur, is that Vance Capital is now worth nothing. Arthur's blood turned to ice. What are you talking about? You're a hedge fund manager, Arthur. You understand leverage. You understand collateral. She began to walk slowly toward him, and for the first time, he found himself taking a step back. The seed money you used to start your fund, 15 years ago, she continued. The angel investment you thought you'd charmed out of that old banker. That wasn't him. That was my father. It came from my family trust. But it wasn't a gift, Arthur. It was a loan collateralized not just by the fund's assets, but by every asset tied to the trust. That's not true. It is. And when you married me, you signed a waiver giving me, as the executor of my father's estate, full proxy control over that collateral in the event of gross personal misconduct. I believe adultery, particularly with an employee. Yes, I know Sienna was your marketing assistant. Counts. The papers I signed this morning weren't divorce papers, Arthur. They were default notices. Arthur's phone, which had been silent all day, suddenly buzzed. He pulled it out with a trembling hand. A text from his COO, Robert. Margin call. All lines. J. Morgan is pulling our credit. Arthur, what did you do? Another buzz. His private bank. Urgent. Immediate repayment demanded on all personal loans. Another. Vance Capital assets. Frozen pending investigation. While you were at the pool, Amelia said, I called the note. All of it. The stocks you were shorting? My fund took the long position, backed by a consortium I put together. Your little bleed them dry plan? You were betting against me, and you lost. She gestured to his wrist. That Patek, the house, the jet you flew here on. They weren't yours, Arthur. They were on loan, and the loan has been recalled. Arthur stumbled backward, hitting a stone pillar. He wasn't just divorced. He wasn't just embarrassed. He was ruined. He was nothing. The entire edifice of his life, his wealth, his power, had been a house of cards balanced on his wife's boring family trust. He looked at Sienna. Her face was a mask of horror and calculation. She was looking at Arthur, but not with sympathy. She was looking at him as if he were a contagious disease. Arthur, she whispered, her voice tight with panic. Is it true? Arthur couldn't speak. He just stared at his phone, watching his life evaporate in a series of text messages. "Oh my God," Sienna said, backing away from him. "Oh my, I need to use the restroom." She turned and fled, not toward the restrooms, but back toward the lobby. She didn't look back once. Arthur was left alone, surrounded by the quiet hum of the wealthy guests who were now openly staring. He looked at Amelia. The ghost. The beige, boring, predictable woman who had just dismantled his entire world before her water glass got warm. "Why?" he whispered, the only word he could find. "You asked me if I came here to scrub the floors," Amelia said, her voice devoid of triumph. It was just final. "I came here to sign the quarterly reports. You just happened to be here, too." She signaled to Bianchi. Two large, polite, and unyieldingly firm security men materialized from the shadows. "Alessandro," Amelia said, turning her back on Arthur. "Please show Mr. Vance the service exit. His things are being brought down." She walked away, not toward the restaurant, but toward a private study. A man Arthur hadn't noticed before, a distinguished man in a dark suit, her lawyer, David, he now realized, stood up as she approached, holding a folio of documents for her to sign. "Wait!" Arthur cried out. "Amelia! Wait! We can talk about this!" But she didn't turn around. She just disappeared inside, the door closing with a quiet, expensive click. The humiliation was a physical thing, a cold, heavy blanket that smothered the air from his lungs. The two security men, both named Giorgio, didn't lay a hand on him, but their presence was a cage. They moved with the calm, inexorable certainty of men who dealt with distasteful situations for a living, their professionalism a far deeper insult than any overt aggression could have been. Arthur, who had commanded boardrooms with a single glance, was now being herded like a stray animal. They guided him not through the grand, marble-floored lobby where he had made his triumphant entrance, but down a series of sterile service corridors. The walls were stark white, scuffed with black marks from delivery carts. The air, once scented with jasmine and expensive perfume, now smelled faintly of bleach and cooking oil. It was the resort's hidden anatomy, the guts he was never meant to see. Each step away from the opulent guest areas was a step down a ladder he hadn't known he was climbing, a descent into a world he thought he had long since escaped. The office they led him into was small and windowless, furnished with a single metal desk and a rolling chair with a tear in the vinyl. On the wall was a corkboard pinned with staff schedules and safety notices. This was the nadir. This was where his imperial reign ended. His luggage, the entire set of custom monogrammed Louis Vuitton hard cases that a personal shopper had assured him projected effortless global power, was piled unceremoniously by the door. It wasn't stacked with care. It was dumped, a monument to his fallen status. A junior staff member, a young man named Luca with nervous eyes and a carefully neutral expression, was waiting for him. He studiously avoided looking directly at Arthur, focusing instead on a tablet he held with both hands. "Mr. Vance," Luca began, his voice barely above a murmur. Arthur's instinct, the snarling, cornered reflex of a deposed king, was to lash out. "Don't you Mr. Vance me! Get Bianchi down here! Get me the owner! This is an outrage!" Luca flinched but held his ground. The Georgios, standing by the door, shifted their weight ever so slightly, a silent reminder of the new reality. Luca's refusal to engage, his adherence to protocol, was another wall Arthur couldn't breach. He was no longer a guest to be placated. He was a problem to be processed. "I need you to sign here, sir," Luca said, extending the tablet. "It's a receipt for your personal effects, acknowledging that you have taken possession of them from the property." Arthur stared at the screen. The list of his own belongings felt like an indictment. 1-1 Patek Philippe watch, rose gold. 1 pair of Loro Piana driving loafers, 3 bespoke Brioni suits. It was an inventory of his ruin. He snatched the stylus, his hand shaking with such violent tremors that his signature was a jagged, illegible scar across the screen. He shoved the tablet back at the boy. Luca took it, his eyes flicking down for a moment. He seemed to steel himself for the next part. "Sir, your associate, Miss Sienna. She left a message for you." A flicker of something pathetic and desperate ignited in Arthur's chest. Hope. Maybe she'd had a change of heart. Maybe she was waiting for him, had arranged a car. Maybe this was all a terrible misunderstanding. "What is it? Did she get a taxi? Where is she?" Luca swallowed, his gaze fixed on a point on the wall just over Arthur's shoulder. She said, and these were her words, sir, "Do not contact me. Ever." The words struck Arthur with the force of a physical blow. Ever. Not "I'm sorry," not "I'll call you," but a final, brutal severing. He saw her now with horrifying clarity, not as a partner, not even as a mistress, but as a parasite that had just detached itself from a dying host. He had seen her as a prize he had won. She had seen him as a position she had temporarily occupied. As if to twist the knife, Luca slid a small, sealed envelope across the desk. The paper was the same thick, creamy stock used for the restaurant menus. Arthur tore it open with fumbling fingers. Inside was not a note of apology or explanation. It was a bill. It was an itemized list of every incidental he and Sienna had consumed since their arrival. It was all there in crisp, unforgiving black ink. The 4 magnums of Taitinger Rosé by the pool, the emergency Dior sunglasses Sienna had insisted on from the hotel boutique, the couple's massage he hadn't even wanted, the ridiculously expensive plate of melon she had sent back. Every single charge was a small monument to his own foolishness. He scanned down to the bottom line, a number that would have been trivial to him just that morning. $22,480. Below it, stamped in a vicious, accusatory red, were 2 words: "Payment declined." "My cards. There must be a mistake," he stammered, the lie tasting like acid in his mouth. He knew there was no mistake. He could feel the digital guillotine that Amelia had dropped, severing him from the global financial network. "We are aware of the situation, sir," Luca said, his voice soft with what might have been pity. "Signora Vance's instructions were to put it on your tab. This copy is for your records." For your records. A final, mocking piece of paperwork for the man who was now a non-entity. He crumpled the bill in his fist, the thick paper resisting, a final echo of the quality he could no longer afford. One of the Giorgios opened the service door, revealing not the manicured, lamplit grounds of the estate, but a dark, gravel-strewn path that ran alongside the building, the opulent, jasmine-scented paradise he had inhabited just minutes ago was a world away. Here, the air was cool and smelled of damp earth and the faint, unpleasant odor from a nearby row of dumpsters. "The public ferry dock is that way," the security guard said, his voice flat and final. He pointed into the oppressive darkness. "It is a 20-minute walk." The words hung in the air, absurd and impossible. "A walk?" Arthur's voice cracked. "You can't be serious. I need a car. Call me a taxi. A boat. I'll pay," he added, the words hollow even to his own ears. "We are not a taxi service, sir," the guard replied without a flicker of emotion. He and his partner stepped back inside. The heavy service door closed, and the lock engaged with a definitive metallic thud that echoed in the sudden silence. It was the sound of his old life being sealed away forever. He was alone. Truly, utterly alone in the dark, surrounded by luggage that represented a fortune he no longer possessed. He looked down at his hands, then at the Brioni suit that suddenly felt like a cheap costume. He had to move the bags himself. The thought was paralyzing. He bent down, his back protesting, and grabbed the handle of the largest suitcase. It was incredibly heavy. He grunted, pulling it a few feet along the gravel path, the small wheels catching and scraping on the stones. He had to stop, breathing heavily, sweat beading on his forehead. He set off on the long, humiliating walk, dragging the suitcase behind him, its rattling wheels the only sound accompanying his ragged breaths. The path was uneven, and he stumbled twice, his thin-soled loafers offering no protection against the sharp stones. Each painful step was a fresh humiliation. From above, he could hear the faint, elegant sounds of the world he'd been ejected from. The sophisticated murmur of conversation, the clinking of glasses, the soft strains of a string quartet playing on the terrace. He imagined the other guests, the German industrialist, the French actress, glancing at his empty sofa, perhaps sharing a brief, pitying whisper before turning back to their champagne. He was already a ghost, a cautionary anecdote to be briefly savoured. As the path curved toward the front of the estate, he saw the main dock, illuminated by wrought-iron lamps. A sleek, private water taxi, its mahogany deck gleaming, was just pulling away. He instinctively ducked behind a thick cypress tree, his heart pounding with a new, sharper shame. He saw a flash of canary yellow fabric. It was Sienna. She was not alone. She was laughing, a bright, tinkling sound that carried across the water. Her arm was linked through that of the German industrialist, a man whose name Arthur couldn't even remember. The man was older, with a quiet, confident posture that made Arthur's own brashness seem childish in retrospect. He was listening to Sienna, nodding, his expression one of amused indulgence. It was the same look Arthur had worn just yesterday. He was watching his own part being recast in real time. Sienna leaned her head on the man's shoulder, looked up at him with wide, adoring eyes, and then they were gone, the boat accelerating into the darkness, leaving a shimmering wake on the black water. She hadn't even glanced back. Arthur felt a wave of nausea. He leaned against the rough bark of the tree, the reality of his situation pressing down on him. He hadn't just been a provider, he had been a stepping stone, a temporary convenience. His grand romantic narrative had been nothing but a business transaction, and his contract had just been voided. He finally stumbled out of the darkness onto the ferry dock. It was nothing like the polished private marina of the villa. It was a crude wooden platform, weathered and splintered, with a single, buzzing fluorescent light that attracted a cloud of moths. A few other people were waiting, a young couple with backpacks, an elderly woman with a shopping bag, a local fisherman smoking a cigarette. They glanced at him, at his ridiculously expensive suit and his mountain of luggage, with open curiosity. He was a freak show, the man who had fallen from the sky. He sat on his largest suitcase, the monogram AV seeming to mock him. High above, on the hill, the Villa Kestrel glittered like a private constellation. He could see the lights on in the imperial suite. His suite, where housekeepers were already erasing any trace of his existence. Then, his eyes were drawn to a different set of windows, in a wing of the villa he hadn't even known was there. A large corner office, its lights blazing. A silhouette moved to the window. It was Amelia. She was not looking down at him. She was looking out at the vast, dark expanse of the lake. Her lake. She held a phone to her ear, nodding occasionally. Mr. Bianchi stood respectfully a few feet away, holding a folder. Her lawyer, David, was there too, pointing to something on a large blueprint spread across a table. They were working. They were building. This wasn't the end of a story for her. It was just another Tuesday night. She was an empress in her war room, and he had been a jester playing in her courtyard, completely oblivious to the scale of her power. The quaint little family office was a global enterprise, and he had been nothing more than a minor, misbehaving asset. His arrogance, his dismissal of her, his affair, they weren't grand betrayals that had broken her heart. They were simply liabilities on a balance sheet, and she, the consummate manager, had finally liquidated them. The ferry's horn blared, a loud, ugly sound that startled him. The boat, a large, functional, and entirely unglamorous vessel, churned toward the dock. He stood up, his legs stiff, and began the laborious process of hauling his luggage aboard, bumping into the other passengers, muttering apologies that felt foreign on his tongue. He found a hard plastic bench on the open-air deck and collapsed onto it. The engines rumbled to life, and the ferry pulled away from the shore. He watched as the lights of the Villa Kestrel grew smaller and smaller, until they were just another sparkle on the horizon. The cold wind whipped across the water, chilling him through his thin suit jacket. He put his head in his hands, the crumpled, useless bill still clutched in his fist. He hadn't just been checked out. He had been rendered obsolete. He had been erased. And as the boat chugged across the dark, indifferent water, Arthur Vance, for the first time in his life, began to weep. The ferry thudded against the pilings of the Como town dock, a jarring, unceremonious arrival that vibrated through the cheap plastic bench and up into Arthur's bones. The other passengers, the backpackers and the locals, surged to their feet, eager to get home. Arthur remained seated, a statue of frozen disbelief, until a crewman yelled, "Signore, finito!" The end. He stood, his body aching, and was faced with the immediate, logistical nightmare of his life: the luggage. He wrestled the bags onto the dock, one by one, a sweaty, grunting spectacle. His hands, accustomed to signing 9-figure deals, were now raw and blistered from the unaccustomed manual labor. The other passengers flowed around him, a river of normal life parting around a rock of opulent misery. No one offered to help. They just stared at the man in the $5,000 suit, now streaked with grime from the ferry deck, who looked like a refugee from a world they only saw in magazines. He was on the brightly lit promenade. It was late, past 11, but the Lungolago was still alive with people strolling, eating gelato, their laughter echoing across the water. It felt like a personal attack. He lined his suitcases up on the pavement like soldiers in a lost cause. He needed a taxi. He needed a hotel. He needed to think. A taxi pulled up. Arthur raised his hand, a gesture he had performed 1,000 times. The driver got out, looked at the mountain of luggage, looked at Arthur, and sighed. "Dove? Where?" "Hotel." Arthur's mind went blank, then latched onto the only other name he knew, a name from his old life. "Hotel Via d'Este, in Cernobbio." The driver's eyes widened, then narrowed. Via d'Este. He whistled, a low, appraising sound. This was a fare worth having. He began, with surprising efficiency, to load the bags into the minivan's trunk, a puzzle of leather and brass. Arthur climbed into the back seat, sinking into the worn upholstery. The car smelled of stale tobacco and pine-scented air freshener. The drive was silent. Arthur stared out the window as they left the town centre and wound along the lake's edge. He saw the grand, gated entrances to other villas, worlds of light and power he had, just hours ago, belonged to. He was in a daze, a state of profound shock that insulated him from the full, crushing weight of his reality. He was operating on the muscle memory of wealth. He would get a room, call Stephen in the morning, and this nightmare would be sorted out. Amelia had made her point. It was a vicious, brilliant power play, but it couldn't be final. It simply couldn't. They pulled up the long, majestic driveway of the Villa d'Este, a hotel that rivaled the Kestrel in its grandeur and history. The doorman, draped in a magnificent uniform, hurried over and opened Arthur's door, greeting him with a polished, "Buonasera, signore." "Welcome." Arthur stepped out, his confidence momentarily, reflexively, returning. This was his world. He could fix this. He strode into the lobby, a breathtaking expanse of marble, chandeliers, and priceless antiques. He walked directly to the front desk, leaving the driver and the doorman to handle the bags. "A suite, please," he said to the clerk, a woman whose smile was a masterpiece of professional hospitality. "Lakeview, whatever you have." "Of course, sir. May I have a credit card and your passport?" Arthur pulled out his wallet. He handed her the Amex Centurion. The black card, his primary weapon and symbol, looked solid and real. He was Arthur Vance. This would work. The clerk swiped it. Her smile faltered, just for a second. She swiped it again. "I'm sorry, signore. There seems to be an issue." "That's impossible," Arthur said, his voice a little too loud. "Run it again." "I have, sir," she said, her voice dropping, her eyes flicking to the doorman. "It is declined." "Declined?" The word was alien. "Fine." He was annoyed, not panicked. Not yet. He pulled out his JP Morgan Reserve card. "Try this one." She swiped it. The result was the same. Her smile was gone, replaced by a mask of polite suspicion. "This one as well, sir." "This is ridiculous," Arthur said, his voice echoing in the cavernous lobby. A couple dining on the terrace turned to look. "Your system is broken. Call the bank." "Sir, it is nearly midnight," the clerk said, her patience clearly gone. "Both cards are declined." Arthur's blood ran cold. The shock was wearing off, replaced by a creeping, icy terror. It was real. Amelia had done it. She had cut every line. He fumbled in his wallet. Cash. He had cash. He'd taken out 1,000 euros at the airport for walking around money. He'd given some to Sienna. He pulled out what was left, around 700 euros. "Here," he said, shoving the bills onto the counter. "This is for the deposit. I'll sort the cards in the morning." The clerk looked at the small pile of cash with undisguised contempt. "Signore, our rooms start at 3,000 euros per night. This is not sufficient for a deposit, or even for one night. But I just need a room. I'm afraid we have no availability for you, sir," she said, the final polite words of execution. A discreet signal, and a security manager, not a doorman, was suddenly at Arthur's elbow. "Sir, if you would please come with me." He was escorted back outside. The doorman, his face now a mask of disdain, was pulling his last suitcase from the taxi. The driver stood by, his arms crossed, his expression furious. "My fare," the driver snapped. "To Cannobio. And the weight, 120 euros. Arthur stared at him. 120 euros. For a drive that ended in his own eviction. He looked at the 700 euros in his hand. He gave the man the money, his hand trembling. The driver counted it, handed back a few coins, got in his cab, and sped off, leaving Arthur alone on the curb, a pariah at the gates of paradise. He was stranded. It was past midnight. His luggage, his beautiful, useless luggage, was piled around his feet like a barricade. He couldn't stay here. He looked at the pile. 3 large suitcases, a garment bag, his briefcase. He couldn't carry it all. He made a decision. It was the first decision of his new life. He unzipped the largest suitcase, his hands tearing at the contents. He pulled out a pair of jeans, a simple polo shirt, his dop kit, and his laptop. He stuffed them into his briefcase and his one small carry-on roller bag. He zipped them up. Then he stood and looked at the rest. The Brioni suits, the handmade shoes, the silk ties. Thousands and thousands of dollars of his old life, sitting on a curb in Italy. He turned his back on it. He left it all there. He began to walk, pulling the single roller bag, its wheels rattling on the cobblestones. He walked away from the lake, away from the lights, away from the world he knew. He walked for what felt like hours, his feet screaming in their thin leather shoes. He headed toward the one place he knew would be open, the train station. The area around the Station was a different world. The grand villas gave way to drab 1960s apartment blocks. The scent of jasmine was replaced by the smell of diesel and stale beer. He found what he was looking for. A small 2-star albergo with a flickering neon sign that simply said, Hotel. He pushed open the glass door. The lobby was a small, linoleum-tiled room where a sleepy man in a t-shirt sat behind a plywood desk, watching a tiny television. The man looked up, his eyes taking in Arthur's filthy, expensive suit and his single, high-end roller bag. It was a combination that screamed trouble. Avete una camera? Arthur asked, his voice a dry croak. Do you have a room? The man grunted. 80 euro. 80 euros. In anticipo. In advance. Arthur pulled out his remaining cash. He had just over 500 euros left. He peeled off the notes and handed them over. The man took them, counted them, and pushed a physical key across the desk. It was attached to a large red plastic fob with the room number 3B written on it in faded marker. Terzo piano, the man said, gesturing to a tiny, coffin-like elevator. The elevator shuddered its way to the 3rd floor, the smell of stale cigarettes thick in the air. He found room 3B. The key barely worked in the lock, but after a struggle, the door swung open. The room was a cell. It was dominated by a lumpy double bed covered in a thin, brown and orange bedspread. A single bare bulb hung from the ceiling. The bathroom was a tiny plastic cubicle with a flickering fluorescent light that buzzed like an angry insect. The single window looked out not onto the lake, but onto a narrow, dark alley, where he could hear the clatter of bins and a distant argument in Italian. Arthur walked in. He let the roller bag drop. He didn't turn on the main light, leaving the room in the dim glow from the alley. He sat on the edge of the lumpy bed. The springs squeaked in protest. He was alone. He was in a cheap hotel near a train station. He had 500 euros to his name. He caught his reflection in the cheap, warped mirror hanging on the wall. He saw a stranger, a disheveled, hollow-eyed man, his face pale with sweat and fear. The arrogant king of Lake Como was gone. In his place was this terrified creature. His Patek Philippe still glowed on his wrist. He pulled out his phone. He tried to call Stephen, his lawyer, straight to voicemail. The number you have dialed is not in service. Not voicemail. Disconnected. He tried Robert, his COO. This number is no longer active. He tried his private banker. Disconnected. Amelia hadn't just frozen his assets. She hadn't just called his loans. She had systematically dismantled his entire support structure. The lawyers, the bankers, the executives, they were loyal to the money, and the money was hers. He was excommunicated. He stared at the Patek on his wrist. It was worth, what? $300,000? It was the only thing of value he had left. It was his last life raft. He unclasped it, the rose gold suddenly feeling impossibly heavy, almost obscene, in the squalor of the room. He placed it on the chipped laminate nightstand. The quiet, elegant tick, tick. Tick of its movement was the only sound in the room, a relentless, indifferent clock counting down the seconds of a life that had already expired. Thank you for joining us for this story. It's a powerful reminder that arrogancy often blinds us to the true power sitting right across the table. Arthur saw his wife as a relic of his past, never realizing she was the architect of his entire present. He thought he owned the world, but he didn't even own himself. His flaunting was not a sign of his success, but the trigger for his spectacular downfall, proving that quiet intelligence and hidden strength will always outlast the loudest boasts. What did you think of Amelia's revenge? Was it perfectly executed, or a calculated move she'd been planning for years? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story and want more tales of dramatic justice and incredible twists, please hit that like button, share this video with someone who loves a good story, and most importantly, click subscribe and turn on all notifications. We have new stories dropping every week, and you won't want to miss what happens next.